few voices from on the ground in America and things. But you're going to be inside the Zoom, and so you can ask questions on there's a question and answer function here. So please just pop in a question. And I think we can even potentially promote you up to panelist to ask your question in person. We might experiment with that later. But also I think Sheridan, who is our producer, he's going to press some magic button and we're going to start broadcasting live soon. Is that right, Sheridan? Oh, we are live. Oh, shit. Sorry, everybody. I thought that was my little pep talk before we went live. Oh, dear, what a disaster. Anyway, well, listen, thank you so much for tuning in. We said this was going to be informal. I didn't think it was going to be quite this informal, but anyway, that's the way it goes. What I thought I would do is I'm just going to go around and sort of say hello to the different get the panelists to sort of just say hello and tell us where they are, where they're based, and what their feelings are at the moment, whether they are feeling doomy or otherwise cautiously optimistic. I think one person said. Sarah, can I go to you first? So Sarah Kenzior, can you introduce yourself and just tell us where you are and how you're feeling at the moment, Sarah?
Yeah, I'm Sarah Kenzior, the author of the books Hiding in Plain Sight and The View from Flyover Country. I host a podcast called Gaslit Nation. I'm based in St. Louis, Missouri, and I mostly am just in a state of heightened dread, which I've been in for about, 5 years. I'm relieved that the day is finally here, but I think of Election Day less as a day than as a season because of the enormous number of complications to this election, ranging from how we've had to respond to the pandemic, to changing the way that we vote, to the fact that we have a president who has said, he won't concede, he won't accept the results. He's backed by violent followers. There are a lot of bad ways that this can go, and I hope it doesn't go any of those ways. I hope that for once I'm pleasantly surprised.
So how are you feeling in your gut? You think it is going to be, you think that, Sarah, just like your snap in your gut, who do you think is going to win?
Well, I think if it's a free and fair election, it's Biden. And I felt that the whole time. And I felt that before Biden was even the nominee. I mean, Trump is not that popular. The media makes him look more popular than he actually is. So the question is always, will it be a free and fair election? We already had the problems of domestic voter suppression, foreign interference, insecure machines. Then we had the problems of voting by mail, which when that was introduced because of the pandemic, the Trump administration responded to it by trying to destroy the Postal Service. So all of that adds up to a really unstable, volatile, and frightening situation. So yeah, I mean, my gut feeling is just sort of nerves mixed with, I guess, some hope. I fervently want Joe Biden to win this election, because if he wins, it's not like everything will be wonderful and, go back to quote unquote normal, but we have a chance. We have a chance as a country to rebuild, to fix some of the structural problems that caused this disaster. The world will have a chance to deal with issues like transnational organized crime, climate change, things that are affecting all of us, things that affect you guys in the UK just as much, because our crises are interconnected. So I'm just really, really hoping that not just Biden wins, but that the Democrats win the Senate, win the House, and get back some form of leverage and control over the Republican Party, which is really just a crime cult.
David Baddiel. It's a bit mean to get people to introduce themselves. David, who is an amazing Renaissance man, writer, presenter, novelist, comedian. And you're in London, David, but you're secretly American, which I never realised before.
Well, I was born in America, so I do have dual citizenship. So I do have some skin in the game. Well, everyone has skin in the game of who the American president is. I'm feeling kind of, here's the thing about Trump, and Alexei Sayle, who's a comedian, may disagree with this, but as a comedian, if he goes, I will miss him. Because he is like, there's something, I mean, he's obviously hilariously absurd as a creation anyway. I have a theory that he is actually kind of funny boned. Like, from the word go, I thought there's something of the unknowing Oliver Hardy of this man. Like, I don't know if you remember when he pushed through the G7 conference very early on, we got a sense of this boorish, terrible bully that he is. But I remember as he pushed through all these other people, he stood there for a while buttoning his jacket. And I remember thinking, oh, right, without knowing it, he's a kind of supreme clown. right? And a lot of demagogues are clown. Like Hitler is absurd when you think about it. Mussolini, completely fucking absurd. And Trump is in that mold. And part of me thinks that he's the most unbelievable creation, you know, in a very negative way, comically. And besides anything, I have 10 minutes of material about him that I was doing in my stand-up set that got furloughed in April. And if he obviously, you know, ends up in a rabbit hole and has to be pulled out by Marines, I'll have to completely rewrite that stuff. But politically and intellectually, and really just from the point of view of truth, like I am, you know, the thing that I can't bear about Trump more than anything else that he's done is the assault that his presidency has created on the idea of truth. And I am very, as it were, genetically connected to the idea of truth. I find it very difficult to lie, and I can't bear it when people lie in general. So the idea of sort of systemic lying that has happened under the Trump administration and that has permeated the world, really, and that he is the kind of figurehead of, he's the great prophet of lying. That is what I really would like to see changed, in some sense that we can somehow, I mean, you know, he's really not the only thing that's going on in the assault on truth, but some idea that maybe if the untruth, you know, as Sarah just said, the untruth that he's popular can be righted as the starting point, and the idea that, you know, that the things that he's saying, that this election won't be real, it won't be a fair election. If it is, and Biden wins, then that's step one in the reconstitution of truth. And that's what I hope for.
And what do you think? So David, in your gut, what are you thinking? Or what are you going to wake up to tomorrow, do you think?
Well, I think everyone is thinking the same thing, as far as I can make out, who is not a Trump supporter, which is, fuck, we were wrong about Brexit, fuck, we were wrong about Clinton, and so we can't rest on any kind of laurels. And, you know, all of us had the experience, certainly in Britain, because of the time, of like going to sleep and being fairly sure of one result, and then feeling incredible and weird dread and that the world had been knocked off its axis when you woke up and it was a whole different reality. And you know particularly about the way that that reality was, you know, changed from the way it should have been with Brexit, but the same thing kind of felt the same with Trump. So having said that, I would have thought the world must have learned some kind of lesson since then. Like even pollsters must have learned some kind of lesson. Like all this stuff about the polls got it wrong. Okay, so they've had 5 years to tune what they do so they're not so wrong, surely. Because otherwise, what's the point of polls if they're always wrong? You might as well just all make them redundant. So I assume that they've weighted stuff and they've tuned stuff and they've graded what they do so the polls are a bit more, you know, accurate than they were 4 years ago. But I don't know. So, you know, my gut is fearful because it always is. I'm Jewish. But I think that it should be Biden. Everything says to me it should really be Biden. And I do think America, a large proportion of America, you know, Biden is an incredibly ordinary politician. And I think that's what people want. Because the thing about Trump is that he is extraordinary in all sorts of terrible ways. And Biden is ordinary. And I think there's a kind of relief at the idea of ordinariness that he represents.
So, Bina, I'm going to come to you next because Bina actually worked for, I mean, I don't know how you've managed to cope for the last 4 years, worked for Obama, for the Obama administration. So, but wrote an amazing book called The Optimist Telescope, and about sort of thinking long term, and that involves a sort of certain amount of optimism. And Bina's now, she's the editorial page director for the Boston Globe. So it's right in the thick of like trying to figure out what's going on. And Bina texted me earlier and she said, you were cautiously optimistic, which I was very impressed with. And I thought, well, this is going to be comforting. So give us some comfort, Bina.
Well, it might be stubbornly optimistic. I'm not sure which. And I would just say that I'm commending myself right now. It's a bit after 4 p.m. here in Boston, and I have not started drinking bourbon yet. So I think that that's a sign of my stubborn optimism for now. But I think if you think about the polls, I mean, even the 2016 polls, it was within the margin of error that Trump could win, right? It's not the case that the polls were all wrong. That said, the polling has gotten better. And if you look at just the national popular vote, I think it's pretty obvious with the historic turnout we're seeing. 100 million people have already voted early as of today, and millions more will vote today. And turnout of this kind, when there's a sitting president, incumbent facing reelection, usually signals, right? Usually signals, not that these are normal times, but that people want change, right? And obviously we know that the pandemic, the economic crisis, the fact that Trump has just trampled over every democratic norm and trampled on the rule of law is definitely motivating people. So I think those are causes for optimism. I think the popular vote will be a massive win for Biden. But of course, we have this distortion in the United States, this anachronism, this archaic structure, which is the electoral college, which means that Biden can massively win the popular vote. He could win by as much as 7 million votes, but still lose in key swing states that are determinative of the outcome. And that's, of course, where, the devil's in the details. And I do think, there's some massively kind of optimistic scenarios, and I know Kyle's going to get into this, but there's a chance that Texas, which has been a Republican stronghold, could actually turn blue. There's been a huge turnout of young Latinx voters, which are changing the demographics there. That's a reason for hope. I do think that the things that Sarah raised are the same things that cause me concern. So this has not been a fair fight, even going back way before the president started spreading misinformation about mail-in balloting. He's trying to dismiss mail-in ballots as being fraudulent in advance of basically them being tabulated and knowing that they could be, determinative in states like Pennsylvania. But even going back before that to the way that the GOP has gained control of state legislatures across the country and gerrymandered districts, voting electoral districts, going to the way that the Supreme Courts in some of these states are highly conservative. Federal district courts, if this comes before U.S. judges, if it comes before the Supreme Court, there are conservative justices on the Supreme Court that have already sort of showed their hand. I talked to some constitutional scholars in recent days, indicating that they could have some sort of crack brain theory by which they think the Supreme Court can strike down state Supreme Courts that uphold making a fair count, a full count of every ballot, by virtue of some theory that the Supreme Court's allowed to interfere to help out the state legislatures, to make sure the state legislatures get to do what they want, even if what they want is to invalidate and disenfranchise millions of Americans. So I am worried about the scenarios that include violence. I'm worried about the scenarios that include legal challenges to the outcome. But in terms of the voter intimidation and suppression efforts and the misinformation efforts, measuring that against the turnout, I kind of go with my stubborn optimistic sense in my gut and say, I think the turnout for Biden is going to be significant enough and in enough states that those Rust Belt states where we're not going to see counts come in till later in the week, they might not even matter if Georgia and Texas turn blue. And, again, that's me being optimistic, and I could be proven very wrong in the next 24 hours.
Oh, Bina, I hope you're right. And of course, it doesn't answer the scenario, though, that of course, even if there is an outright victory tonight, that doesn't solve everything, does it? The next question of
yeah, I mean, that's the real answer here, is that Trumpism doesn't die with Trump out of the White House. I mean, Trumpism is alive and well in America. The people who've been galvanized, the white supremacists that have been called out of the shadows in this country. Obviously, there are reverberations of populist, xenophobic movements all around the world. And, Marine Le Pen's defeat didn't defeat xenophobia in France. But here we have an actual, we've had an administration that has aided and abetted this kind of rhetoric, this kind of policy across the country. And I think we would be naive to think that the election of Joe Biden can actually put that cat back in the bag. What I think it can do, especially if the Senate turns blue as well, goes to the Democrats, is usher in some transformative policy around economic inequality, around racial justice, around climate change, around actually bringing teeth to some of those democratic norms that have been destroyed by virtue of having the most corrupt president in American history, who has used the Justice Department as his personal law firm.
Mm. So, Alexi, can I just go to, so David suggested that that you would be pleased in the sense of having comic material, perhaps. Still.
No, I don't know if Alexi would. I was. I can't speak for Alexi.
No, sorry, I got that wrong. Just tell us, Alexi, how are you feeling about it? You're in London. You're watching from afar.
Yeah, I mean, I never really felt that there was an awful lot to say about Trump. Really, it's he's such a kind of cartoonish figure. But I mean, what you were asking about how people were feeling. I've looked into my soul, and I find I feel nothing really. I'm numb inside, really. There's been too many shocked. I don't look so worried. I don't really mean it. Been too many shocks. But what I am interested in, I was talking to an American friend the other day who was very optimistic and was saying that, Biden was a good guy and so on. But it seems to me, and that also he would have to, because he will be elected, assuming he's had to reach out to Sanders supporters and AOC and various other people, and that therefore he will have to, at least in part, incorporate some of their agenda. Whereas Starmer seemed to be elected with a similar proposition, and in my opinion, has viciously swerved to the right as soon as he gained power, because he's in hock to certain forces, establishment forces, the banks, the arms industry, the security complex. And I wonder, I'm ignorant about American US politics, but I wonder, won't Biden do the same thing? Or
you've cut out there. You cut out.
Will prevent him from doing that.
Oh, sorry, Alexi. Sorry, Alexi, you've cut out there. I tell you what, if that's all right, instead of answering that question, is it all right if we go to Kyle now? So we've got Kyle Taylor here, who's based in London but is American. And Kyle, can you tell us what you did for Hillary in 2016, and then you're going to sort of lead us through some scenarios of what we
Yeah, I'm trying to answer the question for everybody. Should you stay up, basically? And I've got a whole bunch of stuff on the swing states. In 2016, I was in one of the remote war rooms in North Carolina. I co-managed the coordinated campaign, which works to bridge Hillary for America, Senate, governor, all the rest of it. And so, as well as all the progressive groups. And I had just lived through Brexit here, waking up at Glastonbury to the result, going, oh my God. And then seeing the trends and thinking, this is going to happen in America. And so went back to work the cycle. And so I've just done a little quick 5 minutes on what, should I stay up? What is early voting telling us, what to watch, and when we'll know something? So the whole thing the question earlier was about this enthusiasm gap. Are people going to be excited to go out for Biden? Well, nearly 100 million people voted early. And if we look at who's voting early, I took some stats just from Texas. And this is the percent of people who's voted this year compared to that group in 2016. So for Hispanics, white college educated, Asian and African American groups, more people in Texas from those groups have already voted than voted in total in 2016, with white non-college educated at 93%. So almost the same amount, which means turnout's going to be huge. 138 million people voted in 2016. 100 million people have already voted this year. I think we could see 160 million people voting. A lot of conversations about the national polls, the popular vote. The most accurate 2016 poll right now shows Biden up by 11%. And I just put this graphic in because save for 2004, the Republican Party hasn't won the popular vote since 1988. So looking at the popular vote isn't really important in this election. It's all about the states. And the Electoral College. And so this is the US map with all the different numbers of votes. They're not that important because most states are pretty sure of which way they're going to go. I do want to quickly point out the Electoral College is a hugely racist, institutionally terrible system that disenfranchises tons of people. Non-metropolitan is hugely overrepresented. And if you look at just California and Wyoming, you see that a vote in Wyoming is worth sometimes 7 times a vote in California. Okay, so what matters? Well, these are the states I think matter this election, and these are the states I think people should be watching. I'm sure somebody's going, why isn't Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan up there? The actually polling showing Biden is so far ahead in those 3 states, it would be very unlikely that he doesn't win all 3. Okay, let's look at these states instead in terms of when they're called and who they're probably going to be called for. Okay, so at midnight, we're going to see Florida. At 12:30, we'll see results from Georgia, Ohio, North Carolina. 1 o'clock, Texas. 2 o'clock, Arizona. And then at 3 o'clock, Nevada and Iowa. Now, this is based on the most recent A+ graded by 538 poll of which way each state will go based on the most recent poll. And I think it's fairly accurate as a baseline. So this is sort of your worst case scenario. Probably going, why isn't Pennsylvania on there? Well, Pennsylvania doesn't count their mail-in ballots until polls close. They don't start counting them until it closes. So it's likely if Pennsylvania is close, we're not going to know for a really long time. This is the electoral map as I've just laid out the states, noting Pennsylvania as undecided on election night. What do we see? Well, you need to get 270 to win. We have Biden at 268 and Trump at 250. And that's really, really important because it's that time in between where we are we're feeling concerned. And so here's what to look for. Midnight, 12:30 on those states. If Biden is ahead in Florida and North Carolina, it's probably going to be okay. And if Georgia and Ohio are close, it's probably going to be okay. At 1 a.m., if Biden is close in Texas or ahead in Texas, it's probably going to be okay. And if Pennsylvania is called on the night, which I would not anticipate, but if it is, it's going to be okay. The most surprising thing we'll see at 2 is if Trump wins Arizona. And then at 3, if you see Nevada, if you're still up, you see Nevada coming in and Biden up by at least 9%. That's enough of that vote in that state to suggest that he'll do well other places. And of course, if Iowa's close, because the most recent poll had Trump winning Iowa by, I think, 6 or 7%. If Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, if any of those are close, that means it's going to be a tough night for Biden. I remember being in North Carolina, Virginia came in and Virginia was close. And we thought we were going to win Virginia by 5, 6, 7%. And it was the sort of holy shit moment of the night. And it only got worse from there. So worry about Pennsylvania. It's likely to be the state that determines the outcome of the election. There's a massive number of mail-in ballots that won't be counted until polls close. And that gives us the time for Trump to delegitimize the results. And it's likely that regardless of the outcome, there could be widespread violence. And we cannot forget the role of Facebook and other social media in this, and the ability for misinformation and disinformation, particularly about the results, to spread very, very quickly and be used as an opportunity to delegitimize while other people do what everyone else has been describing, Republicans filing lawsuits, trying to upturn the outcome, so forth and so on.
So how are you feeling, Kyle? So you haven't answered the question. How are you feeling? I
was feeling better before I was compiling this and looking at most recent polling, and now I'm feeling a bit jittery. I think the popular vote win is going to be maybe a minimum of 7 million votes. I think he could win by more than 7 million votes. But I think the Electoral College is still, as soon as we see Florida, Georgia, North Carolina early numbers, I think we'll be able to know what's going to happen.
So we've got Angela Robinson and Alexandra Kondratska, who are filmmakers and writers, and who are also activist organisers with Time's Up. You guys, you told me earlier that I asked you if you were in LA, which is where you live, and you said that you've left because you're worried about the threat of violence there. Or am I not supposed to know that?
No, it's okay.
Tell me what you're sort of feeling on the ground there, and whether you're sort of feeling. How are you? What's your things at the moment?
Everyone is incredibly nervous. Everybody is incredibly nervous. Marijuana is legal in California, and I think it's going to be well used tonight. I think I don't know anyone who's been sleeping well.
Everybody feels so burned from 2016 that even if you hear anything optimistic, it's kind of put in a box and I think everybody's just waiting and trying not to, like, levels of anxiety with everything converging from COVID, spiking in incredible amounts in the US in this election. It's kind of batshit crazy, but we're just here.
And does it did it feel kind of, the spectre of violence? I mean, we've seen these pictures of the shops being boarded up all over America. Does that feel sort of real, that it does feel like it could erupt?
Well, that's why we're here in Utah. We're way up in the mountains in Utah, and we live in a really urban area in LA. And there were riots earlier this year, and all the shops got boarded up in our neighborhood. And so we noticed that shops are being boarded up again all over the country. And in fact, Trump has boarded up the White House. He's got, 6 layers of barricades or something like that. Mm-hmm. So I think that a lot of people are expecting violence.
It was scary during the, whether or not it was great during the George Floyd protests, but when the National Guard came in, so you'd see like down Hollywood Boulevard, like soldiers on a like military truck moving in, and we feel like the stuff going on in Portland or sending in the troops is kind of a rehearsal for this moment by the Trump administration. So basically, we ironically have chose to hide out in the mountains of Utah, super red state, but we just feel like it'll be less. We don't know. We have no idea what's going to happen.
David, you said in an email that you'd actually did a program where you tried to get to grips with the Electoral College. Is that right?
Well, I used to do a program on Radio 4 called David Hill Tries to Understand, in which I tried to understand in quite a short amount of time things I'd never understood. I mean, things like electricity and how nuts grow. And then one of those was the American electoral system was what it was. And I went and interviewed the American ambassador in London. And yeah, I didn't really get it. I still don't really get it. I mean, there's just because the thing is, he also tried to explain to me about the primaries and the way that the nominees happen for the candidates and caucuses and all that stuff. And so my mind was blown really by the amount of delegation that seems to go on in the American electoral system. I mean, I know we don't have a one person, one vote thing, which has fucked up British politics in many ways over the years. But Americans, it just seems like every single vote is really just a vote for someone else to be sent somewhere else to vote for something else. There's a real a heavy amount of refraction that appears to go on. And I just lost sight of how democracy is actually filtered through all this refraction. That's what confused me and still confuses me.
But do you think you feel you got the hang of it now? Because I have to say is that I really, and Carl, I was trying my best to pay attention there, but still a lot of it was sort of like going over, I have to say.
It's so complicated. And, a large part of American doesn't even fully understand the complexity of the system. Like 2016, how many people said to me, including my parents, but she got 3 million more votes. This doesn't make any sense. And it's like, yeah, it doesn't.
I heard, Carl, I watched a guy, I can't remember who it was, unfortunately, but an American political analyst talk about the steps that did not involve like militias and did not involve coups by which Trump could still overturn a vote simply by the Electoral College and then ratification in the Senate or something or other. It was like a series of bodies that are presently controlled by the Republicans in general would, if the vote is in abeyance in any way, it would go there and then there and then there. And these kind of, behind the scenes people might in the end say, yeah, Trump's still president. That's not a very clear way of explaining a very complex idea, but that's what I took from it.
And also,
yeah,
oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Carol. Sorry.
No,
I was going to say that's really spot on. I mean, the vote on election day determines who the state's electors will vote for. The electors are then go meet in December and actually vote on who will be president. So as you said, you cast your vote in a state to get electors to go to the convention in December to vote for the president. And then that then goes to the Senate and it gets confirmed in January.
Yeah. And he was saying that the tradition whereby the losing person concedes, comes on telly and says, I am no longer the president, or if they're the challenger, I give up to the sitting president, whatever. Yeah, that is a tradition. There's nothing in the Constitution that says that that guy or woman has to say, I give up. And if they don't, then all this stuff kicks in and that's the process by which the president is decided. Is that right?
That's
correct.
I think the more scenario is that there are ballots, there are standing mail-in ballots. So say Pennsylvania has a large portion of ballots that remain uncounted tonight. Trump declares premature victory, trying to control the narrative, as we know he does so well, playing the media and every other platform for getting information out. And then Pennsylvania is left to do a count of those mail-in ballots, and there are efforts to pressure the legislature there to invalidate ballots, and that ends up being
counting.
Right. And what happens is the state legislatures have to be called on to act ethically. They have to be called on to require full counts of all valid ballots, and to pledge their electors, this process Kyle's talking about, to actually represent the state's vote rather than become what are called faithless electors, which just can basically be pledged based on what political people might want them to do. And so I think that the more likely scenario is that something like this, some battle over how and whether these state legislatures should count the ballots and how the electors should be pledged, might appear before the Supreme Court, which, as we know, as of just a couple of weeks ago, now has a conservative majority. And the president has all but said that he nominated Amy Coney Barrett, our most recent Supreme Court justice, for the reason of breaking a tie on the Supreme about the election outcome, which would just be, of course, horrible. But anyway, I don't know that I've clarified anything with that, but I
no, that was again slightly over my head. But
this is opposed to just the person with the most votes winning.
Yeah,
we do all of this instead of that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things to know is that it's great that everybody know what these rules are, understand what these rules are, understand the rules are complicated. Trump is going to break the rules. You don't go by the book when the book is burning. That's been my advice for people battling him. You should expect him to do things that are not just unethical or immoral or unprecedented, but that are illegal, or that he will rewrite the law so that a law that would be considered, something in action that would be considered illegal for a previous administration becomes legal for him, like the way that he abuses the pardon power, the way that he uses Bill Barr as his personal attorney. He will do things that seem like they could be impossible, like the scenario just outlined here, where he basically hand-selected appointees to the Supreme Court who he knows will always rule on his behalf, regardless of what the actual case is or the evidence or the stakes or whatever. He will go to that court over the will of the voters. Democracy makes no difference to him. National security makes no difference to him. The integrity or sovereignty of our country makes no difference. He just wants money, power, and immunity from prosecution. And I think he will go to any length possible to get it. If this doesn't happen, if he somehow concedes, that's great. I hope that that's what happens. But I think everyone should prepare, not just, for a response to the rules outlined here, but for kind of things that are usually beyond our worst imagination. Sorry.
Actually, I tell you what, I might ask, we've got a couple more guests who are also here. So Tamsin and Varun, do you want to come in as well? And Tamsin, I thought that might be a segue to you. So Tamsin Shaw, she is a philosopher at New York University who's based in New York. And she said, what should I come and talk about? And I said, well, yeah, actually, isn't this what you want to talk about, Tamsin? That they basically all need to go to jail. Isn't that your kind of line?
Yeah, I suppose I feel the way Sarah does, that Trump's not going to stick to the norms and the procedures and the laws. I feel a sense of dread. Kyle just described, even if we're within the system, the electoral system that America has, the Republicans have, since 2016, known how to game that. They went to the swing states. They tried to get to older people who will come out to vote instead of trying to get this youth vote, instead of trying to be popular nationally. They don't care about popularity. They don't care about having a popular mandate. They care about gaming this system so they can win. And if they can't do it through purely legal means this time, they didn't last time because of foreign interference, etc., they're going to cheat. And I worry that even if somehow we come out with a Biden administration, that they will be forgiven. And I know it's not the American way to prosecute people from a previous administration, because it's not considered the liberal thing to do. I mean, liberal democratic. You don't prosecute the losers, because the whole point of liberal democracy is that the minority in an election are still guaranteed the right to try again. And that's how you have political stability. That's how you have different parties tolerate one another within a liberal democratic framework. But these guys are trying to destroy liberal democracy. And at a time when liberal democracy is beleaguered around the world, I think we have to stand up to that. We have to hold them to account. I would love to see people prosecuted for what they have done. So God willing, we get a Biden administration. I just really want to see them make the liberal democracy much more robust and be very tough about that.
Varun, Varun Bashikalia is you're American based in Berlin. Varun's actually an amazing expert on the use of data in politics and has really studied the way that political campaigns deploy that. And certainly we know they did that to devastating effect, didn't they, in 2016, Varun? And Varun, also, you're from Wisconsin, aren't you, I think? Is that your family?
Kansas.
Oh, is it Texas?
Kansas.
Sorry,
Kansas.
Sorry, Varun. What do you make of? What do you think they're up to this time? And do you think the point is, in 2016 we actually had no idea what was going on, did we, on the platforms? Do you sort of fear that there could be a sort of nasty surprise there this time around?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, someone was saying earlier that maybe it was Sarah saying that this has felt like an election season. I mean, thanks to technology, there's no longer really a campaign season. Campaigning is happening now 365 days a year, 24/7. I think that's one of the reasons why electorates around the world are as polarized as they are. I don't think this is a phenomenon that's exclusive to the US. And I think it's, with respect to the technology use, I think the problem is obvious when it comes to the big major tech platforms like Facebook, like Google, like Twitter, which Trump has so brilliantly and effectively used to control the narrative. But also, there's a whole data industrial complex that's supporting this infrastructure. Lots of other smaller data firms that enable the platforms to, use our data in ways that we don't expect. Cambridge Analytica was certainly sensationalized and captured headlines, but really there are hundreds of companies around the world that are using our data in ways that voters don't realize. I was just reading, this is slightly different from using our personal data, but I was just reading a piece in the Washington Post about what appears to be a robocall-driven voter suppression campaign. I was talking earlier today to a group based in Kiev about even a Democratic voter registration outfit that had geofenced. It's like putting a virtual perimeter around a point of interest, had geofenced Black Lives Matter protests in June in key swing districts in the US. That allows these firms to harvest the mobile IDs of protesters. If you have enough money, that's easily de-anonymized, and then use that information to encourage people to register to vote. I mean, so even I think when the technology might be supporting a political outcome that we support, I think at the end of the day, what does this say about the state of surveillance that we have come to live with? But anyway, taking a step away from the technology itself, I think when I reflect on the past 4 years, I think it was Masha Gessen who said that dealing with Donald Trump is like trying to play chess against someone who just knocks all the pieces off the board. And for us to respond by saying, no, your knight can't move that way and your king can only move in this direction, is, I think, totally missing the point. And I was thinking a lot about, I just mentioned I was talking to a group based in Kiev earlier today, and a few days ago I was talking to a friend of mine based in Minsk in Belarus. And I was thinking a lot about this quote from Timothy Snyder, which I'll just read briefly if it's all right. He wrote, In the year before the American president was elected, American journalists were often mistaken about his campaign. As he surmounted barrier after barrier and accumulated victory after victory, our commentary assured us that at the next stage, he would be stopped by one fine American institution or another. There was, meanwhile, one group of observers who took a different position: Eastern Europeans and those who study Eastern Europe. To them, much of the president's campaign was familiar, and the final outcome was no surprise. Ukrainian and Russian journalists who sniffed the air in the Midwest said more realistic things than American pollsters who had built careers on understanding the politics of their own country. To Ukrainians, Americans seemed comically slow to react to the obvious threats of cyber war and fake news. And I think, having spoken to a number of my friends across parts of Eastern Europe, having a Facebook feed from, having grown up in Kansas, seeing how mobilized Trump's base is, I think it does set an alarm for me. It does set an alarming expectation for what's to come. I don't have a great feeling. I mean, Carol, as you know, I am very much an optimist, but this, I don't have a great feeling about this. Trump is a guy who can't forfeit a game of golf. How's he going to say that he lost an election? He has.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
No. The reason why, sorry, I just thought I'd jump in because basically you were describing Sarah then when you said it was the journalist who'd studied the authoritarian countries who. And it's what I find really fascinating, Sarah, is that in early 2017, when I started paying attention to you, there was a lot of, we saw people being sort of belittled as sort of fringe figures, really, that you were sort of this sort of hyperbole. And now I think, are you feeling somewhat vindicated that way?
It's a very unpleasant way to be vindicated. I knew I was right. I had studied kleptocracies in the former Soviet Union. I'd studied Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan, countries that I saw, a connection to in terms of how I imagined Trump would govern. But then as I researched Trump, I saw this wasn't a metaphorical connection at all. This was a literal connection. It was the Russian mafia and the Kremlin, as well as, individual actors in these post-Soviet states who were deeply corrupt that backed him up. And there's a widespread refusal to admit that in the US. Some of it was reluctance to admit how weak our institutions were, how racist our population is. They didn't want to admit things about the United States, but also most journalists are really ignorant of the former Soviet Union, of Eastern Europe, of any dictatorship beyond like Hitler and Stalin. If it's not like a one-for-one resemblance, they're basically like, this is impossible. It can't be authoritarianism. It doesn't happen here. That was a mantra I heard over and over again. Every country that ends up with a dictatorship started out saying it can't happen here. And so it's been horrible to watch every check and balance fail, to watch the Trump administration outwit people with what I thought were like pretty basic moves that, were easy to see through. And I still don't quite fathom why the House Democrats and the courts and other journalists couldn't see through these moves. But the main thing is people are suffering. I mean, that's what's at the heart of this. We have over 220,000 people dead from coronavirus, mass evictions, mass unemployment, hate crimes, loss of our basic freedoms and rights. Like, that's what's at stake. That's the heart of it. And so it breaks my heart. I'd rather have been wrong. I'd rather have been wrong and humiliated and just made a laughing stock. Like, I'd trade that in a second. No one wants to be right about this kind of thing.
Can I bring you, because there's a couple of other journalists here as well, and there's a question in the Q&A as well. So there's a question from Colin Mahegan in the Q&As, and he said, why has the US media been afraid to explore and expand on Trump's criminal connections? And I thought it'd be interesting, Bina, to have your view on that, because you are very much at the heart of the sort of editorial pages of the Boston Globe. And we've also been joined, I think, by Alexandra, here we go, Morton Kondrake, who is Alexandra's father, who is you're done 50 years, I understand, Morton, of journalising and political commentating, and you've seen everything from Watergate onwards. So I thought it'd be interesting to hear both of your sort of views upon this. Has the US media been naive in the way that it's covered Trump, do you think? Nina, do you-
I'm sure I can go first, and I'm sorry, I'm going to have to jump off in a few moments. This has been really interesting and really fun, actually, in a weird way. Even though we're talking about the death of democracy, it's okay to say that. So I do think that the media in general has been slow in criticizing Trump. I mean, if you look at the way the coverage of him in 2015, 2016, I mean, I was the most pessimistic person I knew the night of the election in 2016, even though I wore suffragette white and I made a cocktail themed for Hillary to win. I was the most pessimistic about her winning because of the way that Donald Trump so masterfully manipulated the media and so masterfully manipulated working class Americans. You know, I grew up in Ohio. It used to be a critical swing state. Now it's become more reliably red, though tonight we'll see. And I think that, yes, a lot of what Sarah said, I do agree with in terms of people in the media not having enough of a historical or comparative example to bring to their understanding. But I think it's actually even more deep than just a sort of naivete or lack of historical context or knowledge. I think it's a desire to believe that the American system, that American democracy is resilient. And, you know, it's very interlinked with the desire to, you know, uphold the idea of America, the very idea of the country. The nation's founding myths are around being a democratic, inclusive society, a society where people's voices are heard. And obviously we see manifestations of that continue despite the Trump reign, whether it's protesters in the streets after George Floyd, or it's, you know, just the numerous ways in which democracy, I think, continues to work despite his best efforts. But I do think there's been a fundamental naivety that kind of maybe goes back to those founding myths, and also the way we hear us basically put on a pedestal past presidents and leaders, and think that every leader who occupies the Oval Office will behave by those same norms, or that every person who sits in the Senate will adhere to those same democratic norms. And I think what we've seen is that the norms really are just, you know, they're handshakes. They're not at all anything with teeth and enforcement. And I do think that's the huge opportunity that a Biden administration would have to have Ms. Means point. I'm sorry, I just butchered your name, and people do it to me all the time. But I just feel that the opportunities to actually create real policy that would remedy this. And so what I hope the media will do to correct for the way it's covered Trump, I think it's slowly built to pointing out these connections with Russia. I think the New York Times has done some incredible work around Trump's corruption, and others too, but is to actually push towards policy that could permanently change. And I think our editorial board will be looking at policy that can actually make more rigorous these democratic norms. Long-winded answer.
Thanks.
Can I just add the phrase that I think sums up what you just, it's the idea of American exceptionalism. And we are taught it in school like it's a real political theory, that America is somehow different than every other country in the world, and things that happen other places simply cannot happen in America. And it's similar in the UK, and here they call it the good chap model, the idea that if everyone's just a good chap, it'll all be fine. But the rule of law has to beat out bad chaps. That's it.
I like that. Much distinct. Thank you.
Can I just do a quick vote? Like, who do you think that if Biden wins, do you think that Trump is going to leave the White House? So 3 no's, 4 no's.
I think it depends on the size of the victory to some extent, doesn't it? I mean, if it's at all close, I think he definitely won't. I think if it's an absolute landslide, I just don't see how even someone as criminal as Trump will be able to withstand, you know, the pressure for him to leave, I think.
What do you think? Who's going to come back into that one? Tamsin.
I guess the trouble is it might be an absolute landslide nationally, but as Kyle says, it's about those swing states, and it's not going to be an absolute landslide in those. And the Republicans know that, and that's where they're going to put all the pressure. That's where they've got the lawyers lined up.
Right.
That's where they've taken a lot of care to make sure they dominate the state legislatures over the last 4 years. They've had a game plan for this. and I don't think they care if Biden's eight points ahead nationally.
And they haven't won the, say for 2004, they haven't won the popular vote since 88, and they've been thinking since 96. How do we game the system, since really every demographic suggests we're not going to win long term? So how do we change the rules? How do we usurp the rules? That's been their masterstroke. That while we were all, thinking hope and change and following the rules, they were thinking about how to bend the rules.
I'd forgotten, we've also got Zaman Qureshi is in here, who's this amazing, are you still only 18, Zaman? Can that
yes.
be true? It's ridiculous. Zaman is so young and so talented, and he's been working with the Real Facebook Oversight Board and doing all sorts of things. And he's 18, he's a politics student. You're in Illinois, aren't you, I think? Zaman,
yes, I am.
Tell us, what's your thoughts? What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I'm not sure what's going to happen. I'm as nervous as I think everyone else is here, but I've seen some promising things in that in certain states, young voter turnout is up at a level that we haven't seen before. So Texas, Georgia, Florida, and that's a positive thing, because we as a population have been written off for years as a voting population, as any group that will have any impact. Yet the most vocal of us individuals are saying that, this is our future, we need to take control. So we actually need to show that at the voting booth. And I hope that rings true tonight. But on the other hand,
can I ask you, Zaman, what's going on TikTok?
Actually, TikTok's really interesting, because there is a lot of political talk on there, but you can get very easily echo chambered on TikTok, because the algorithm is built around what you spend the most time watching. And so if you spend the most time watching, far right, far left, you're only going to see that information. And so I think it's like all other social media, in that you get channeled into your echo chamber.
Oh, I hope the TikTok kids might save us after the Trump rally, where they did that spectacular feat.
Well, yeah, I mean, the other thing though, and about social media, is that I think it's really sad in a sense that our generation has grown up with and only known a lot of disinformation and fake news on social media. And that is the norm for us. And I don't think everyone is best equipped to cut through and understand what that means at our age. But it makes it incredibly challenging to know what is fact, and how do we interpret fact if we have two different views of reality.
Who wants to come in off that? I feel that I'll pick on somebody otherwise. Varun.
Yeah, I mean, I always have thoughts on this topic. Yeah, I think, one, that's of course one big challenge. I think it's also, it's also interesting as I'm not quite your age, I'm a little bit older, I'm 30, but I think, when I think about the 18 to 24-year-olds out there, I think about how interesting and bizarre it is that this generation of people in a way has grown up with private tech companies mediating so many of their social connections. And I think, part of, I think, what makes the work that I've tried to do on this topic a little bit distinctive is that even in the absence of any nefarious agenda, even outside of deploying a disinformation campaign on a swing state or a key district, I think even if you look at those tech products and services that operate openly on the market, like the one I was just talking about, like this Democratic Voter outfit that geofenced Black Lives Matter protests to encourage people to register to vote, to feed them particular political communications. I think even considering those services that operate openly, that are considered fair game and legitimate, I think that gives me reason to feel cause to feel concerned about the integrity of our elections, but also where that might lead. I think one of the questions that I fielded most, Carol, perhaps you as well, in the aftermath of Cambridge Analytica was was, well, does psychometric profiling actually work? In the case of psychometric profiling, I mean, there's a lot of academic literature to back it up, but the whole universe of technologically mediated influence is much larger. But I think, you know, there's a lot more than just psychometric profiling. But I think the better question, to does psychometric profiling work, or does insert this technology work? I think the better question is, what does the use of these techniques and tactics reveal about the people seeking political power? And so whether that technique or tactic is disinformation or whether it's mass voter surveillance, I think when you have someone in power like Donald Trump, who has no respect for the rule of law, it very easily quickly begs the question of how can this be abused? You know, what's stopping, we live in this day and age, or in this technological moment where data, I speak as a data scientist here, has this sort of claim to objectivity. What happens when someone like Donald Trump says, well, your data suggests that you are prone to dissent. Your data suggests that you belong on this Muslim registry. Your data suggests that you are a political opponent. So I think it's a very slippery slope, and I think disinformation is just one piece of that puzzle.
Hey, so listen, I hadn't realised as well. So we were actually, I think we said we were going to wrap at 10, and we've managed to go over 10. And also we've got these questions which we've totally failed to answer. So I'm sorry, everybody, but although I think a lot of the ground has been covered by the conversation we've had, should we just have a closing from some sort of the people who are left here?
Yeah.
What's
I'm so sorry.
Sorry, go on,
go ahead, Carol.
What
I was going to say, I just have to run too, so can I go first?
Yeah, go.
What was it? Just a closing? My closing is this: regardless of what happens tonight, it doesn't end tomorrow. Like, the work starts tomorrow. And I know that sounds daunting, so like take a day off. But if any lesson of 2008, we all thought because we'd elected Obama, it was over. And the reality is elections are a democratic event. Democracy is a way of life, and we have to invest in it constantly, because it is the least worst option, as has been said by people in the past. So just don't, if Biden wins, don't think it's all over. It's just the beginning.
Tamsin, is he going to win?
Is democracy going to win?
Is democracy
that the question?
going to win tonight? I guess that is the question, really.
I desperately hope so. I think it's interesting what Zaman said about his generation. I feel as though there's a huge amount of interest in this online cyber warfare, and that Russia has been attacking democracy using that means. But that warfare isn't taking place online. Russia cares about what's going to be happening in the streets. And what is completely unprecedented about America is the ownership in private hands of about 400 million military-grade weapons. It's unprecedented except for maybe some countries in Africa like Somalia, where there have been civil wars. The Russians are looking at how they can affect people's behavior in the real world, on the streets, and this is not some nice contained problem online, and I think we need to keep a really close eye on that.
And I was gonna give, here we go. So Zaman, I'm just gonna give you the last word, I think, as the youngest member of the panel. You're the one who we're all like resting all of our hopes on for the rest of our lives and humanity. What are you going to tell us? Is it going to be okay, do you think, or what's your gut telling you?
I think it is going to be a cagey thing, but I got involved in politics because Donald Trump won. I mean, I started getting involved when I was 15, and I think he was a call to action, that unless we are actually vested and involved in our politics, no matter of our background or how old we are, that's the way that we ensure the integrity of our democracy. And it's people like us who continue to stand up and push the needle forward and push our politicians and the system is what's going to keep democracy intact.
Okay, all right. Well, listen, thank you ever so much to everybody who came to our rather experimental, informal, ad hoc approach to a panel discussion. It's better surely than, well, I don't know. Anyway, we'll have to go back now to the feelings of doom scrolling through Twitter. But it's been great I've enjoyed it anyway. I've enjoyed seeing all of your faces and hearing what you had to say. So maybe we'll reconvene in the next few days and see what happens. Okay, thanks.